She lived a quiet life among books and silence until she woke up with strange marks burning on her skin and a hunger she couldn't explain. Then a man with golden eyes appeared, whispering of true lunas and ancient bloodlines, revealing she was the chosen one meant to unite rival packs. The scent of blood reached him before he saw her collapse at the edge of his territory. Darius stood motionless on the ridge, his enhanced senses cataloging every detail of the wounded stranger who had dared to stumble into lands that belonged to the most feared pack in the northern mountains. Her human scent was mixed with something else, something that made his wolf stir restlessly beneath his skin after 5 years of deliberate dormancy. She was dying. The knowledge hit him with unexpected force as he watched her struggle to her feet, only to fall again onto the moss-covered ground. Her clothes were torn, revealing glimpses of pale skin marred by deep scratches and bruises that spoke of a desperate flight through unforgiving wilderness. A torn backpack lay beside her, its contents scattered like broken dreams across the forest floor. For a moment, something twisted painfully in his chest. The sensation was so foreign after years of careful emotional numbness that he almost didn't recognize it as concern. He had built walls around his heart so high that even he had forgotten what it felt like when they cracked. The woman raised her head, and their eyes met across the distance. Even wounded and exhausted, there was no submission in her gaze, no fear. Only a quiet determination that should have been impossible for someone in her position. Most humans who encountered his kind either cowered or ran. She did neither. Instead, she pushed herself up on trembling arms and met his stare with defiant green eyes that seemed to see straight through the carefully constructed armor he wore like a second skin. In that moment, something shifted in the air between them, something dangerous. Darius forced himself to remain still, fighting every instinct that demanded he go to her. He was the alpha of the Shadowmere pack, ruler of these mountains, protector of his people. He did not rescue wounded strangers who appeared in his territory like ghosts from a past he refused to remember. He had learned long ago that caring led to loss, and loss led to the kind of pain that could destroy a man from the inside out. But as he watched her struggle to stand once more, her jaw set with stubborn determination, despite the blood seeping through her torn shirt, he found himself moving down the ridge before his mind could override the decision. By the time he reached her, she had managed to get to her feet, swaying dangerously but upright. Up close, he could see the full extent of her injuries. Claw marks across her shoulder suggested an encounter with something wild and angry. Her dark hair was matted with blood from a head wound that needed immediate attention. "You're trespassing," he said, his voice carrying the authority that had commanded respect and fear for over a decade. She tilted her chin up, and he was struck again by the complete absence of fear in her expression. "I'm dying," she replied simply. "Forgive me if I didn't stop to check property lines." The unexpected response drew something that might have been a smile from him if he remembered how to make such expressions. Instead, he found himself studying her face more carefully. She was beautiful in a way that was almost painful to look at, with delicate features that spoke of strength rather than fragility. But it was her eyes that held him captive. They were the deep green of forest shadows, and they held secrets that made his wolf pace restlessly in the depths of his consciousness. "What are you running from?" The question slipped out before he could stop it. Her lips curved in what might have been a bitter smile. "Everything," she said softly. "The same as you, I'd imagine." The words hit him like a physical blow. How could this stranger see so clearly what he had hidden from his own pack for 5 years? How could she recognize the running he did while standing perfectly still? "You don't know anything about me," he said, but the words lacked their usual steel. "I know you're the alpha of this territory," she said, gesturing weakly at the obvious markers of pack boundaries that surrounded them. "I know you've been watching me from that ridge for 10 minutes, trying to decide whether to help or let me die." And I know that something in you is fighting itself right now, because helping strangers isn't something you do anymore. The accuracy of her assessment sent a chill down his spine. You seem remarkably well informed for someone who claims to be lost. Not lost, she corrected. Running, there's a difference. Before he could respond, she swayed dangerously, and instinct overrode caution. He caught her as she fell, her slight weight settling against his chest in a way that made every nerve ending come alive. The contact sent electricity racing through his system, awakening parts of himself he had thought permanently buried. She looked up at him, her face inches from his, and whispered, "Please don't let me die here. I have too much to make up for." The raw honesty in her voice shattered something inside him. For just a moment, the walls he had built came crashing down, and he felt everything he had been avoiding for 5 years. The loneliness, the grief, the desperate hunger for connection that he had starved into silence. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice rougher than he intended. "Serena," she breathed, and then her eyes fluttered closed as unconsciousness claimed her. Darius stood in the growing twilight, holding a stranger who had somehow managed to crack the foundation of everything he had built to protect himself. Her name echoed in his mind like a prayer he had forgotten how to say. Serena. It suited her, this woman who had faced him without fear and seen through his defenses like they were made of glass. The sensible thing would be to leave her at the human settlement 20 miles south. The safe thing would be to ensure she got medical attention and then forget she had ever existed. But as he looked down at her pale face, peaceful now in unconsciousness, he knew he would do neither. Instead, he lifted her carefully in his arms and began the walk back to the pack grounds, knowing that this decision would change everything. His wolf rumbled with satisfaction at the choice, pleased in ways that made Darius deeply uncomfortable. He had not listened to his wolf's desires in 5 years, had not trusted the instincts that had once guided him so surely. The pack house came into view as full darkness settled over the mountains. Lights glowed warmly in windows, and he could hear the sounds of evening activity from within. Normal pack life continuing as it always did, blissfully unaware that their alpha was about to disrupt the careful order he had spent years establishing. Marcus, his beta and oldest friend, appeared at the front door before Darius reached the steps. The other man's expression shifted from casual greeting to sharp concern as he took in the unconscious woman in his alpha's arms. "Darius," Marcus said carefully, using his name instead of his title in the way that meant they were speaking as friends rather than pack hierarchy. "She needs medical attention," Darius said, not pausing as he climbed the steps. "Call Elena." "Who is she?" Marcus asked, falling into step beside him. "I don't know." The answer was honest as far as it went. He knew her name, knew she was running from something, knew she had the most unsettling ability to see straight through him. But who she really was, what she was running from, why she had appeared in his territory like an answer to a prayer he hadn't known he was praying, remained mysteries. As they entered the pack house, he became aware of the stairs following them. Pack members emerged from various rooms, drawn by curiosity and concern. He could feel their questions like physical weights, but he ignored them all as he climbed the stairs to the guest quarters. The room he chose was at the end of the hall, far enough from the common areas to provide privacy, but close enough to his own quarters that he would hear if anything happened. He laid Serena carefully on the bed, and for a moment he allowed himself to really look at her. Even unconscious and injured, there was something compelling about her. Her face held an inner strength that spoke of battles fought and survived. Scars on her hands suggested a life that had required her to fight for everything she had. She was not some helpless damsel who had stumbled into his territory by accident. She was a survivor, and that realization made him respect her even more. Elena arrived within minutes, her medical bag in hand and questions in her eyes. The Pax healer was one of the few people who could challenge Darius when necessary, and he could see her preparing to do exactly that. "Before you ask," he said as she began examining Serena, "I don't know who she is or why she was in our territory. I found her collapsed at the eastern border." Elena said non-committally, but her tone suggested she had opinions she was keeping to herself. "These wounds are from claws, something big and angry. The head injury is concerning but not life-threatening. She'll need rest and care, but she should recover fully." "Good," Darius said, surprised by the relief that flooded through him. Elena glanced at him sharply. "You're planning to let her stay?" It wasn't a question. Elena had known him long enough to read the signs he thought he was hiding. "Until she recovers," he said carefully. And then, he didn't answer because he didn't know. The thought of Serena leaving, of never seeing those challenging green eyes again, created a hollow ache in his chest that he didn't want to examine too closely. "I'll check on her in a few hours," Elena said, packing up her supplies. "She should wake up by morning. When she does, she's going to have questions." "I'll handle it." Elena paused at the door. "Darius," she said gently, "it's been 5 years. Maybe it's time." He knew what she meant, but he couldn't acknowledge it. Not yet. Not when everything he had built his new life on was suddenly feeling as fragile as spun glass. After Elena left, he pulled a chair up beside the bed and settled in to wait. He told himself it was duty, that any alpha would ensure the safety of someone recovering in their territory. But as the hours passed, and he found himself studying the delicate curve of Serena's cheek, the way her dark lashes cast shadows on her pale skin, he knew he was lying to himself. Near midnight, she stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, confusion flickering across her features as she took in the unfamiliar surroundings. When her gaze found his, wariness replaced confusion. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice hoarse but steady. "Pack house," he said simply. "You needed medical attention." She struggled to sit up, wincing at the movement. "I should go." "You should rest." The command in his voice was automatic, the alpha in him responding to what he perceived as a threat to her well-being. Her eyes flashed. "I don't take orders from you. In my territory, you do." They stared at each other, the air thick with tension. Finally, she leaned back against the pillows, but her expression remained defiant. "Fine," she said, "but only until I'm strong enough to leave." "Agreed," he said, though the word tasted like a lie on his tongue. Something told him that when the time came for her to leave, it would be far more complicated than either of them imagined. But as he watched her settle back into sleep, her face relaxing into peaceful lines, he found that he didn't care about complications. For the first time in 5 years, he felt truly alive, and that was worth whatever chaos might come. The first challenge came 3 days later, when Serena refused to stay in bed, despite Elena's strict orders. Darius found her in the Pax herb garden at dawn, carefully examining the medicinal plants with the focused attention of someone who truly understood their properties. "You should be resting," he said, his voice carrying the edge of command that usually sent pack members scurrying to obey. She didn't even look up from the feverfew she was studying. "I've been resting for 3 days. Any longer, and I'll go insane from boredom." Elena said I needed rest, not that I needed to be bedridden. Serena finally straightened, meeting his gaze with that same fearless directness that had unsettled him from their first encounter. "Besides, I know more about these plants than most healers. I could be useful instead of just another mouth to feed." The casual dismissal of his authority should have angered him. Instead, he found himself studying the way morning light caught the auburn highlights in her dark hair, the way her torn clothes couldn't hide the graceful strength of her movements. 3 days of proper food and rest had restored some color to her pale cheeks, but the wariness in her eyes remained. "Useful how?" he asked, genuinely curious despite himself. That willow bark you're growing isn't being prepared correctly, she said, gesturing to a section of the garden. You're drying it wrong. It's losing half its potency, and that comfrey over there could treat the joint pain I've noticed in some of your older pack members. But it needs to be harvested at the right time of day and processed properly. Darius felt something shift in his chest as he watched her move through the garden, her hands gentle but confident as she touched various plants. This wasn't the desperate woman who had collapsed at his borders. This was someone with knowledge, purpose, and a quiet competence that commanded respect. "Where did you learn about medicinal plants?" he asked. For just a moment, something flickered across her face. Pain, maybe, or regret. "My mother," she said simply, "before she died." The words hung in the air between them, carrying a weight of loss that he recognized all too well. Without thinking, he stepped closer, drawn by an impulse to offer comfort that he thought he had forgotten how to feel. "I'm sorry," he said, and meant it more than he had meant anything in years. She looked up at him then, and for a heartbeat, her carefully maintained walls slipped. He saw the grief there, the loneliness that matched his own, the strength it took to keep moving when everything inside screamed to stop. "Thank you," she whispered, and the simple words carried more intimacy than any touch. The moment was broken by the sound of approaching footsteps. Marcus appeared around the corner of the garden, his expression carefully neutral in the way that meant he had important news he wasn't sure how to deliver. "Darius," he said formally, "we have visitors at the eastern border." Something in Marcus's tone made Darius's wolf stir uneasily. "Who?" "Scouts from the Blood Moon Pack. They're asking about a missing woman." The world seemed to stop. Beside him, Serena went completely still, her face draining of what little color it had regained. Her scent shifted, filling with the sharp tang of fear and something darker. Guilt, maybe, or resignation. "What kind of missing woman?" Darius asked, though he already knew the answer. "Human. Dark hair, green eyes. They say she stole something valuable and disappeared 3 weeks ago." Darius looked at Serena, who was staring at the ground with the expression of someone watching their world crumble. "Is it true?" he asked quietly. When she finally met his eyes, hers were filled with a desperation that cut through him like a blade. "It's complicated," she said. "Uncomplicate it," he commanded, but his voice was gentler than his words. She glanced at Marcus, who was watching the exchange with growing understanding. "Could we have a moment alone?" Marcus looked to Darius, who nodded. When they were alone in the garden, surrounded by the morning song of birds and the scent of growing things, Serena finally spoke. "I didn't steal anything," she said, "but I did take something that belonged to me, something they had no right to keep, which was my freedom." The words came out fierce and broken. "I was contracted to the Blood Moon Alpha's son, a political arrangement my father made before he died. When I tried to leave, they said I belonged to them, that I had no choice." Understanding crashed over Darius like a physical blow. He had heard rumors about the Blood Moon Pack's practices, their old-fashioned approach to alliances and territorial agreements. The idea of this strong, fierce woman being treated like property sent rage coursing through his veins. "So you ran," he said. "So I ran." She lifted her chin with familiar defiance. "And I'd do it again. I won't be owned by anyone." The conviction in her voice stirred something primal in him. His wolf responded to her strength, her refusal to submit, her willingness to risk everything for her autonomy. But the practical part of his mind, the part that had kept his pack safe for years, knew that harboring a fugitive from another pack could mean war. "They'll want you back," he said carefully. "Yes." Her voice was steady, but he could see her hands trembling slightly at her sides. "And if you turn me over to them, I'll never be free again." The unspoken question hung between them. What was he willing to risk for a woman he barely knew? What was one stranger's freedom worth against the safety of his entire pack? Before he could answer, the sound of angry voices drifted from the main house. Marcus's voice, calm but firm, and two others that carried the aggressive edge of men who were used to getting their way. "They're here," Serena said unnecessarily. Darius found himself at a crossroads that felt familiar and terrifying. 5 years ago, he had failed to protect someone he loved. He had let political considerations and careful strategy override his instincts, and the woman who had owned his heart had paid the price. Now another woman stood before him, asking for his protection, and every fiber of his being screamed that this was his chance to choose differently. "Come with me," he said, making a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff. "Where?" "Somewhere safe, while I figure out how to handle this." He led her quickly through a side entrance to the pack house, avoiding the main rooms where the Blood Moon representatives were undoubtedly making their demands. His private quarters were in the West Wing, far from the public areas and protected by both physical security and pack loyalty. As they climbed the back stairs, he could hear the voices growing louder. Marcus was stalling, but he wouldn't be able to hold them off indefinitely without seeming deliberately obstructive. Darius's rooms were spacious but simply furnished, designed for function rather than comfort. He rarely spent time here except to sleep, preferring to conduct pack business in the common areas where his leadership was visible and accessible. "Stay here," he said as he settled Serena in the sitting area. "Don't open the door for anyone but me or Marcus. What are you going to tell them? The truth, that we haven't seen any missing women in our territory." She frowned. "But that's a lie." "Is it?" He paused at the door, looking back at her. "You're not missing anymore. You're exactly where you need to be." The words surprised them both. He hadn't meant to reveal so much of what he was feeling, hadn't intended to make such a clear declaration. But seeing her there in his private space, surrounded by the scents and markers of his personal territory, felt right in a way that made his wolf rumble with satisfaction. Serena's eyes widened, and something vulnerable flickered across her face. "Darius, we'll talk after I deal with this," he said, forcing himself to leave before he did something foolish like kiss her senseless. The confrontation in the main hall was exactly what he had expected. Two Blood Moon wolves, both young and aggressive, radiating the kind of barely controlled violence that came from too much testosterone and too little actual experience. They were flanked by Marcus and Elena, who had positioned themselves strategically to control the flow of conversation. Alpha Shadowmere, the taller of the two, said with a minimal bow that just avoided outright insult. "We're tracking a human woman who was last seen heading toward your territory. We have reason to believe she's hiding among your people." "A human woman," Darius repeated calmly. "That's unusual. Most humans avoid our territories. This one had reason to run," the shorter wolf said with a nasty smile. "She stole from Alpha Blood Moon's son, quite valuable property." The way he said property made Darius's control slip just enough for his eyes to flash gold. Both Blood Moon wolves tensed, recognizing the warning sign of a dominant wolf on the edge of his temper. "I don't harbor thieves," Darius said carefully, "but I also don't allow uninvited guests to search my territory. If you have concerns about criminal activity, you're welcome to file a formal complaint with the regional council." It was a diplomatic way of telling them to get lost, and they all knew it. The regional council hadn't met in over 2 years, and when they did, it was for matters of significantly greater importance than one runaway human. "Alpha Blood Moon won't be pleased if his property isn't returned," the taller wolf said, his tone carrying an implied threat. This time, Darius let his authority fill the room like a physical presence. Both younger wolves stepped back instinctively, their wolves recognizing a power that far exceeded their own. "Alpha Blood Moon's displeasure is his own concern," Darius said softly. "As long as he keeps it off my territory." The standoff lasted several more minutes, with veiled threats and diplomatic non-answers exchanged like weapons. Finally, The Blood Moon wolves left with promises to report back to their alpha and suggestions that the matter was far from over. When the door closed behind them, Darius felt exhaustion settle over him like a heavy cloak. He had just potentially started a conflict with a neighboring pack over a woman he had known for 3 days. The rational part of his mind insisted he was making a dangerous mistake. The rest of him didn't care. Marcus waited until the sound of departing footsteps faded before speaking. "You're protecting her?" "Yes, even though it could mean trouble with Blood Moon." "Yes." Marcus studied him with the careful attention of someone who had known him for over a decade. "This isn't just about doing the right thing, is it?" Darius didn't answer immediately. How could he explain something he barely understood himself? How could he describe the way Serena had awakened parts of him he thought were permanently dead? How could he admit that the thought of losing her felt like facing his own execution? "She's under my protection now," he said finally. "That's all that matters." But even as he said the words, he knew they were only the beginning. The Blood Moon pack wouldn't give up easily, and Serena's presence in his territory was about to become significantly more complicated. As he climbed the stairs back to his quarters, he wondered if he was strong enough to protect both his pack and the woman who had somehow become essential to his existence. The next few weeks would test everything he had built, everything he believed about leadership and loyalty and the price of love. But when he opened the door to find Serena pacing anxiously by the window, her face lighting with relief at his return, he knew he would face whatever came next. Some things were worth any risk. The attack came at dawn, 3 weeks after the Blood Moon scouts had left empty-handed. Darius woke to the sound of his daughter's scream, cutting through the morning air like a blade through his heart. For a moment, the past and present collided in his mind, and he was back in that terrible night 5 years ago when everything he loved had been torn away from him. But this was now, and Luna was in danger. He was moving before conscious thought kicked in, his wolf surging to the surface as he burst from his quarters. The scream had come from the eastern gardens, where Luna often went to think when she was troubled. She had been struggling with Serena's presence, caught between resentment over her father's obvious feelings and a desperate longing for the maternal figure she barely remembered losing. What he found when he reached the gardens stopped his heart. Luna was gone, and in her place was a message carved into the ancient oak that marked the pack's ceremonial center. The words were burned into the bark with acid, ensuring they would scar the tree permanently. The daughter for the woman, sunset, Raven's Peak, come alone. Rage, unlike anything he had felt in years, roared through his system. His wolf clawed at his control, demanding blood, demanding vengeance, demanding the complete destruction of anyone who dared threaten his child. But beneath the fury was something even more terrifying, the cold, calculating realization that this was exactly what the Blood Moon Alpha had planned all along. "Darius!" Serena's voice came from behind him, breathless and terrified. She must have heard Luna's scream too, must have run here as quickly as he had. When he turned to face her, he saw his own horror reflected in her green eyes. "They took her," he said, his voice barely recognizable even to himself. Serena's face crumpled. "This is my fault. They took her because of me." "No." The word came out sharp enough to cut. "They took her because they're cowards who prey on children to get what they want." But even as he said it, he could see the guilt eating away at her. She was pulling into herself, building walls that he recognized because he had built them himself. She was preparing to sacrifice herself to save Luna, and the knowledge that he was about to lose them both made something fracture inside his chest. "You can't give yourself up," he said, stepping closer to her. "Luna wouldn't want that." "Luna is 16 years old and innocent," Serena said fiercely. "I'm the one they want. I'm the one who should pay the price." "And what happens after you turn yourself over to them? You think they'll just let Luna go and call it even? You think men who would kidnap a child have any honor left?" The question hung between them like a physical thing. They both knew the answer. The Blood Moon Pack wasn't interested in simple prisoner exchanges. They wanted to send a message to prove that no one could defy them without consequences. Marcus appeared at the edge of the garden, his face grim. "I've got trackers following their scent trail. They're moving fast, but they're not trying to hide their path. They want us to follow." "It's a trap," Darius said. "Obviously, the question is what kind of trap?" Darius studied the message again, his mind racing through possibilities. Raven's Peak was neutral territory, a rocky outcropping that sat exactly on the border between 3 different pack territories. It was isolated, defensible, and far enough from any pack lands that whatever happened there could be denied or explained away. "They want me to come alone," he said slowly. "But they expect me to bring back up anyway. So the real trap isn't at the meeting point. Then where?" Understanding crashed over him like ice water. "Here. While I'm gone, they'll attack the pack house, divide our forces, weaken our defenses, take out the leadership and scatter the rest." It was a classic strategy, one that had been used against smaller packs for generations. Create a crisis that demanded the Alpha's personal attention, then strike at the heart of the territory while the leader was distracted. "So, what do we do?" Marcus asked. Darius looked at Serena, who was listening to their tactical discussion with the focused attention of someone who understood military strategy. Another piece of her puzzle clicked into place in his mind. "We give them what they expect," he said slowly, "but not what they want." The plan that took shape over the next few hours was risky to the point of madness, but it was the only option that gave them a chance of saving both Luna and the pack. It required split-second timing, perfect coordination, and a level of trust that Darius hadn't placed in anyone since his wife died. It also required Serena to walk into the heart of enemy territory with nothing but her wits and a promise that he would come for her. "I don't like this," Marcus said for the 5th time as they finalized the details. "Too many things can go wrong." "Everything can go wrong," Darius agreed. "But this is the only plan that saves everyone." "Not everyone," Serena said quietly. "If this goes bad, if they figure out what we're really doing, then I'll tear them apart with my bare hands," Darius said, and the absolute certainty in his voice made both Marcus and Serena stare at him. "You're not dying for my mistakes. Not today, not ever." The words carried a weight of promise that went far beyond the immediate crisis. Serena's eyes widened as she heard everything he wasn't saying, all the feelings he had been too afraid to acknowledge even to himself. "Darius," she whispered. "When this is over," he said, stepping close enough to touch her but not quite daring to, "we're going to talk. About everything." She nodded, and for a moment the fear and determination in her expression gave way to something softer, something that looked like hope. The exchange was set for sunset, which gave them 6 hours to position everyone and pray that their gamble would pay off. As the sun began its descent toward the mountains, Darius found himself at Raven's Peak with a small team of his best fighters hidden in the rocks around the meeting point. Serena approached from the eastern path, walking with the steady stride of someone who had accepted her fate. She looked small and vulnerable against the stark landscape, but Darius could see the steel in her spine, the quiet courage that had first drawn him to her. The Blood Moon contingent was larger than expected, 8 wolves, all armed, all radiating the kind of aggressive confidence that came from believing they held all the advantages. At their center was a young man who could only be the Alpha's son, the one Serena had been promised to. He was handsome in a cruel way, with the kind of smile that suggested he enjoyed other people's pain. And behind him, tied and gagged but alive, was Luna. The sight of his daughter, terrified but unharmed, sent relief and fury warring through Darius's system. His wolf demanded immediate action, but the rational part of his mind knew that patience was the only thing that would save her. "Serena Blake," the young Alpha called out, his voice carrying across the rocky plateau. "How good of you to finally come home." "Let the girl go, Cameron," Serena replied, her voice steady despite the odds against her. "Your quarrel is with me." Cameron's laugh was ugly. "Oh, I don't think so. You see, running away from me was embarrassing. Hiding among these mountain mongrels was insulting, but making my father's scouts look like fools, that was unforgivable. What do you want?" "Everything," Cameron said simply. "Your submission, their humiliation, and a very public reminder of what happens to anyone who defies the Blood Moon Pack." It was exactly what Darius had expected to hear. Cameron wasn't interested in justice or even revenge. He wanted to make an example that would be talked about for years, a demonstration of power that would solidify his position as his father's heir, which meant he would never let Luna go, no matter what Serena did. The signal came as the sun touched the horizon. A flash of light from the valley below reflected off Marcus's blade. The secondary team was in position at the pack house, ready to spring their part of the trap. Darius rose from his hiding place among the rocks, his presence immediately drawing every eye on the plateau. Cameron's expression shifted from smug satisfaction to wary concern as he realized that the Shadowmere Alpha had not come alone or unprepared. "I think you have something that belongs to me," Darius said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded respect for over a decade. "Actually," Cameron replied, "I think you have something that belongs to me." "Serena belongs to herself," Darius said flatly. "She made her choice when she ran from you." "Choices have consequences," Cameron sneered, "as your daughter is about to learn." The threat was a mistake. It revealed Cameron's true intentions and gave Darius the justification he needed for what came next. His howl split the evening air, a sound that carried both command and fury across the mountains. The response was immediate. From hidden positions all around the plateau, Shadowmere wolves emerged like ghosts made flesh. But more importantly, the answering howl from the valley below told him that Marcus had successfully captured the Blood Moon fighters who had been waiting to attack the pack house. Cameron's eyes went wide as he realized how thoroughly he had been outmaneuvered. "You treacherous bastard," he snarled. "We came here under a flag of truce. You came here with kidnapped children and threats of murder," Darius replied. "Truce was never an option." What followed was swift and decisive. Outnumbered and caught off guard, the Blood Moon wolves surrendered without the devastating battle that Cameron had clearly been hoping for. Luna was freed and immediately ran to Serena, who caught her in a fierce embrace that spoke of bonds that had formed despite the teenager's initial resistance. But it was the moment when Serena turned to him, her eyes bright with tears of relief and something deeper, that made Darius understand what he had been fighting for all along. Not just duty or honor or pack loyalty, but the chance to build something new from the ashes of what he had lost. "Is it over?" Serena asked as he approached them. "The crisis is," he said, allowing himself to touch her face gently. "Everything else is just beginning." Luna looked between them with the sharp perception of someone who was almost an adult. "You love her," she said to her father, but it wasn't an accusation. It was an observation tinged with something that might have been approval. "Yes," Darius said simply, because there was no point in denying what had become obvious to everyone, including himself. "Good," Luna said firmly. "It's about time you stopped punishing yourself for something that wasn't your fault." The words hit him like a physical blow, carrying the wisdom of someone who had watched him struggle with guilt and isolation for 5 years. His daughter had grown up while he wasn't paying attention, had become someone wise and strong and capable of forgiveness that he hadn't thought to ask for. "I love you too," Serena said to him, her voice soft but clear enough for Luna to hear. "Both of you. If you'll have me, The answer came not in words, but in the way Luna stepped back and pushed them together, in the way Darius's arms came around Serena like they had been waiting for her all his life, in the way their lips met under the first stars of evening, while their daughter smiled and their pack howled approval from the rocks around them. Later, much later, when the Blood Moon prisoners had been dealt with and Luna was safely asleep, and the pack house had settled into peaceful quiet, Darius found himself on his private balcony, with Serena curled against his side. "What happens now?" she asked softly. "Now we figure out how to be a family," he said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "All three of us." "And the pack? Will they accept me as your mate?" "They already have," he said with certainty. "You proved yourself tonight. You put Luna's safety above your own, stood up to Cameron, helped plan a strategy that saved everyone. They don't care that you're human. They care that you're strong." She was quiet for a long moment, and he could feel some of the tension leaving her body as she finally allowed herself to believe that she was safe, that she was home. "I never thought I'd have this," she whispered. "A family, a place to belong. Someone who sees me as more than just property to be traded. You're everything," he said fiercely. "My mate, Luna's mother, the heart of this pack, and anyone who tries to take you from us will learn exactly why the Shadowmere wolves are feared throughout these mountains." As if summoned by his words, Luna appeared in the doorway, wearing pajamas and a determined expression. "Can't sleep?" Darius asked. "Wanted to make sure you weren't being stupid and noble and pushing her away," Luna said bluntly. Serena laughed, a sound like music in the night air. "Your daughter is very wise. She gets that from her mother," Darius said. And for the first time in years, the mention of his deceased wife didn't bring pain but gratitude. Gratitude for the time they had shared, for the daughter she had given him, and for the way love could grow again, even in hearts that thought they were permanently broken. The three of them sat together on the balcony as the moon rose full and bright over the mountains, and Darius felt something settle into place in his chest. Not the desperate need that had driven him for years, but peace, contentment. The quiet joy of a man who had found his way home after a long journey through darkness. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, new ways to build the future they all wanted. But tonight, under the stars and surrounded by the scents and sounds of his territory, Darius Shadowmere was exactly where he belonged.